Good morning, good evening. Welcome to week 4 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence Program. Just want to start off with some announcements. So I've gotten a couple of requests. I just want to make sure there's interest. I was going to do a office hour in week 5, but maybe we should just move it for this week. And what I was going to do it on 28 September, Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I say tentative because I don't know if I get enough interest. So please, if you're interested, reply back or make sure you comment on this announcement that you are interested. And I think people wanted to talk about paper 1 before they start launching into paper 2. So I'll take a few minutes to go over that with students, go over your personal comments, and then take it from there. So if there's interest, please let me know. If there's no interest, then we'll just revert back to week 5 where we'll do office hours. VoiceThread. So I've noticed on VoiceThread this week, what I want VoiceThread is to be something like this, where you're not reading off a paper or reading off a book or a report or something. I want you to go as if you're briefing off the cuff like this. Or I don't want to say off the cuff, you can rehearse, but that it's not like you're reading a statement as if you're a prisoner of war or something like that. So please, use VoiceThread as if like this, just points to remind you so you can actually brief, not just read a statement. So the next paper, due October 8th, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. That will be paper 2, your strategy paper. And again, a lot of this history that we're talking about this week and next week is going to be very relevant to that. So paper 1, overview. I've graded them all. You should have your comments back. The requirements, way too broad. Way too broad. I mentioned in the lecture, narrow it down. When you think you've narrowed it down even further. Some people had North Korea as a topic. Some people had North Korean missiles as a topic. I think a topic would be North Korean missile accuracy. And then from there, you can break down your requirements from there. So again, the narrow, and a lot of people did North Korea, but the more narrower your topic is, the more narrow and your requirements can go from there. I would recommend, I should have mentioned this earlier, and I thought I did, but I guess the message didn't get across. It'd be better to use the same topic. So if your topic is North Korean missiles, all your requirements should flow from there. I didn't want North Korean missiles and then MS-13 and then some business intel side. I wanted you to focus on one topic and go in depth there. And I think a key point in these papers as we go from here is depth. I want you to go deep, not give me a whole lot of topics or a whole lot of top-level cover. So I didn't take off if anyone did that, but I just wanted to make that clear at the onset. Social media exploitation. A lot of people actually, not a lot of people, but some people brought this up, and that was good as a int to use. I just be advised, sometimes social media is not as, doesn't bear as much fruit in certain situations. If you're trying to determine Russian involvement in the Ukraine, yes, social media exploitation is good, and that has gained some results. Social media is not as good as in North Korea. Social media, believe it or not, is not very good against MS-13 because the gang is very based on familial relationships and actual relationships, not online. So good social media exploitation, but please, if you're going to use it, make sure it's in an applicable scenario. And then technical analysis, TechInt. This is something that some of you brought up. I think it's worthy, especially when you talked about the North Korean threat. Technical exploitation on missiles trajectory, missile capability, so you can derive how actually capable North Korean missiles are. And that's a int that was discussed in the book. I don't think we discussed it much in the lecture, but it's something that some people put in their requirements. So paper 1 overview, again, I can't emphasize this enough. Again, specificity is key here. Don't just give me these broad brushstroke topics, especially from here on in. So week 3 review. 2 case studies, Pearl Harbor and Yom Kippur, and I hope you you had a good introduction to history as well as learned the topics that are relevant. So the Pearl Harbor case study. I didn't bring this up in the lecture, and I was brought up in the reading, but it's some way to frame how to think about intelligence failure. And Dahl brings this up really well. The traditional school, and again, he outlines this in the first chapter, and the reason I'm bringing this up is this may be a way to look at intelligence failure, whether it's Pearl Harbor, Yom Kippur War, Iraq WMD, 9/11, those failures that we're going to talk about in future topics as well. So the traditional school says intel failure is almost inevitable, that you can't, that whenever we try and have these commissions and try to determine why intel fails, it's because we're Monday morning quarterback. It's very easy to know the information at the end, very hard to put together what's important. And they almost argue that intelligence failures are inevitable. There's too much data out there to discern and to actually pick the patterns, and that maybe you can get the data right, but again, you're still, if you're batting 250 or batting 333, you're still pretty good. There's a reformist school that argues that intelligence failure is a result of organization, or lack of organization, that certain people didn't talk to the right people. And the Pearl Harbor example brings this up, where you had information at the federal and national level that was not disseminated to the local commanders, and that may or may not have made a difference, depending on your hindsight. So, the contrarian school argues that intelligence collection, and the key point here is, in the Pearl Harbor example, we didn't know the location and disposition of the Japanese aircraft carriers. Failure in collection, and that would argue the contrarian school. So that's kind of a framework. You can agree, disagree with each one of these schools. You can pick and choose from each one. But this is how Dahl outlines intel failures, historical intelligence failures as they go on. Dahl argues that the interface between the intelligence analyst and the decision maker is a key point, and that is true. He also argues that there was a lack of tactical intelligence going forward. That because they couldn't give specificities on the location of the Japanese aircraft or the times they're going to attack, that the commanders weren't receptive to the intelligence. Dahl is an excellent writer, and he makes great points in his book. I disagree with this one, however. Very rarely, and I just want to use this as an example, very rarely will you get specific tactical intelligence that the Japanese are going to attack Pearl Harbor on Monday morning or Sunday morning at 8 o'clock and launch their carriers 200 more miles north of Oahu. That's not how intelligence. That's how intelligence works in the movies. It's not how it works in the real time. Give you another example. Those of you who are veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, very rarely do you get intelligence that says there's going to be an IED at this 10-digit grid location at this time, planted during this hour. That intelligence doesn't exist, and commanders hopefully realize they're not going to get that type of intelligence. What you can do is draw a picture that reduces risk. So you're not going to get the time and place of the IED that's going to strike a convoy, but you can say, sir, ma'am, we think the IED window is going to be, based on pattern analysis, is going to be between this time and this time. We think the first convoy that goes off the FOB is the most vulnerable, and we think the first vehicle in the first convoy is the most vulnerable. And yeah, that's not going to happen every time, but the probability of you getting hit by going out at this time, at this part of the week, is higher than if you went during this time. So what you're doing as the intel analyst in that case is you're mitigating risk, or giving advice to mitigate risk. And that's what 90% of intel is. It's no one gives you the time and place of when an attack's going to occur, but you also can formulate based on history, based on patterns, based on the incomplete data. You can give enough information to policymakers so they can mitigate, cleverly, smartly mitigate the risk to their assets. And that's why I disagree with Dahl, because he argues that you have to have some sort of specific tactical intelligence. I think nowhere do you ever get the specific time, date, there's going to be an attack here that Dahl, I think, is looking for. So, great case study. You saw, again, my thoughts on it, Dahl's thoughts on it. Again, I look to the commanders who failed to mitigate risks, even though the risks were well aware at the time. They were well aware. They had enough intelligence to mitigate the risks, and therefore I pin blame back on Kim Il and Short, the two commanders at Pearl Harbor. But I'll let you come up with your own ideas on why you think Pearl Harbor was a failure there. And then the Yom Kippur War. I'm not going to go in detail, but over-reliance on HUMINT is one of the failures that you saw in the Al Jazeera article, that they didn't get that source until the last minute, and they relied on that source for the attack. Addiction to preconceived notions. They didn't, again, as you read in the Avi Shlaim and saw in the Al Jazeera, they believed that the Egyptians would not be able to attack Israel unless they had a significant ability to neutralize the Israeli Air Force with air-to-air combat or surface-to-surface missiles. That's what they were looking for, and obviously that the Egyptians were able to mitigate the Israeli Air Force by not attacking all the way into Israel. And then lack of intelligence net assessment. Again, the Israelis, again, compared too often, relied too much tanks to tanks, aircraft to aircraft. And they didn't do a net assessment about tanks to anti-tank weapons or aircraft to surface-to-air missiles, which the way the Egyptians fought, they fought to maximize the advantage of those asymmetric weapons, and that was not part of the Israeli net assessment. So those are the failures of the Yom Kippur War. And again, please go through these from here on in for the next paper. So week 4 preview. I'm going to be honest, it's a lot of work in week 4. The most work you're going to get in this course. A lot of readings, a lot of documentaries, a lot of my lecture. So be advised, but it's also vital that you focus on this week, you pay attention so you can learn and you could prep for the next paper. So Iraq, WMD, and 9/11 are the two case studies. For me, as I've mentioned, it's happened while I was alive. For some of the younger folks out there, it might be history. So Iraq WMD, the documentary, the Rachel Maddow documentary. Great documentary. I just caution, again, I don't want to get political in this class too much, and Rachel Maddow is definitely she has a political slant to what she is talking about in her TV show and what he's talking about in this documentary. So take it with a grain of salt, but it is an accurate documentary. All the information is accurate, the context is accurate on how we failed, or how WMD, let's just say how we politicized intelligence regarding the WMD issue in Iraq. 60 Minutes, Curveball. If you don't know who Curveball is, you're going to find out who he is this week, and you're going to understand how circular reporting and just bad human intelligence caused the Iraq WMD failure. The committee report, it's 200 pages. Don't read the whole thing. There's a lot of blue boxes in the committee report that highlight specific examples. Read those boxes and read issues that might, in depth, that might pique your interest. And all of those issues, whether it's the infamous aluminum tubes that they couldn't find, or aluminum tubes that they thought were centrifuges, or the UAVs that they thought could disseminate biological spray in the United States. It explains how this information was collected, analyzed, disseminated, where were the issues came up. And that's what I want you to do, go in depth in this week. And then the Sharma lectures, I break my lectures into politicization and intelligence community failures. So those are kind of the two disparate elements for the Iraq WMD issue. And then the second thing, again, 9/11, that's the second probably traumatic incident that's happened, at least in my lifetime, regarding intelligence failure. You touched a bit on it in week 1 with the manhunt, but the documentary National Geographic and then the Nova NSA will explain the 9/11 intel failure, all the issues related to 9/11, why the intelligence community couldn't find it. And that documentary, again, is available on YouTube, and it's put in your reading. You have the readings. You have the doll. Again, we're going to go a couple of chapters in the doll that kind of compare and contrast 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. The 9/11 Commission, one chapter on intelligence organization reform. And the Sharma lectures, and it's about 9/11, how could it be prevented, and about the intelligence community reform efforts after 9/11. Are they adequate? Would they solve the problem? And why do we still have these continued attacks in the wake of 9/11? So that's going to be a big point for this week. What I recommend, even though everything is put in Canvas, kind of lumped in, I recommend you go through the Iraq WMD sections, and then you go through the 9/11 sections separately, so you have so the documentaries and the readings line up with Iraq WMD, and then the documentaries and readings line up with 9/11. So if there's questions or issues, please let me know, and I look forward to hearing about your comments on the discussion board.